Sean. We acknowledge the genocide that took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt that is owed to this indigenous people, specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions, which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe and together build a better future for all that now make this their home. And with that, we can move on to the roll call.
Great. Commissioner Lee Bunnell?
Here.
Commissioner Wadi?
Here.
Vice Chair Moman?
Yeah.
And Chair McLeod?
Here. Item number 3, ex parte communications. Have there been any ex parte communications? Seeing none, we will move on to the consent calendar. The consent calendar items are considered routine and will be enacted by one motion unless an item is requested to be removed from the consent calendar.
We do have someone in the audience who would like to speak on 915 Santa Fe.
Okay. 915.
Yes, so item 4.4, 4-4.
So we will pull item 4-4, 915 Santa Fe Avenue from the consent calendar. And so why don't we go ahead with the rest of the consent calendar. If anyone has any other items they would wish to pull from the consent calendar? No? Seeing none, would anyone like to make a motion?
Let's just ask the audience, if there is anyone else in the audience who would like to pull anything else from the consent calendar, and if you're attending virtually, please use the raise your hand icon. No, thank you.
Okay, so
With that, I'm happy to make a motion to move the remainder of the consent calendar items 4-1 through items 4-3, and I'll make a note. I'll need to recuse myself from 4-1 since I was not in attendance at that meeting.
And I'll second.
okay, let's move to a vote. Commissioner Liebenow?
I'm sorry, I don't know actually what to say.
Uh,
I just
yes or
vote
no?
yes?
Well,
Okay,
yes
yeah.
or no, or abstain, or,
Yes.
okay, Commissioner Bowman?
I vote yes on 4-1 and 4-3, and I abstain on voting on 4-2 because I was not part of the meeting.
Commissioner Wadi?
Similarly, I vote aye, abstaining on item 4-1 due to my absence on that date.
Okay, and I vote yes on all items, with the exception of 4-4, which is pulled. So all motions, all items pass. And with that, we will move on to item 4-4, planning application 24-016, 915 Santa Fe Avenue. And since a member of the public wished to discuss that, why don't we have the member address their concerns at the...
I have a brief presentation, if that's okay.
Why don't we do, we'll just do the whole thing?
Sure,
Presentation?
yes.
Okay.
And,
Standard.
Just one thing, because I thought announcements would come first, and we'll go back to announcements, but you probably hear some extra noise. We had a bit of a flood, so we have a lot of dehumidifiers and heaters going on. So I'm going to request, it's been fun, just an extra request to speak maybe a little bit louder and into the microphone, because especially on this end, it's a little
Okay,
loud.
noted.
All right, good evening. This item is a design review and use permit modification application 24-016 for 915 Santa Fe. For project background, on October 25th, this commission approved a design review and for a 240 square foot second story addition, 49 square foot second story balcony extension at the rear, and a 208 square foot trellis on what would be the 633 square foot roof deck, which encompasses essentially the full roof of the existing home. It also included use permit approval to extend the nonconforming 3-foot 2-inch left or north side, north side yard setback where 3 feet and 8 inches is required. The project modification request is to further extend the second-story addition by 6 feet and 5 inches towards the front of the house, resulting in an increase of 135 square feet. And this addition also requests the continuation of the non-conforming 3-foot 2-inch left side setback. The project modification requests can be seen here in the approved upper and roof floor plan and the proposed upper and roof floor plan to the right. And you can see in the shaded gray area that the sitting room off of the bedroom is proposed to be extended, and the applicant team has said to line up with the walls on the first floor below. So I assume that is a structural consideration. So the neighbor to the north previously and again has expressed concern regarding potential shadows. And staff does note that while there may be shading impacts, they will be minor in nature. That the exception of the continuation of the 6-inch difference in the nonconforming setback, aside from that, that the project conforms with all development standards, and as well that impacts to shading are not a consideration in findings for approval. However, if the board does find that there are modifications to the project that could potentially ameliorate some of the impacts that the neighbor is feeling, staff does recommend that you all consider that. Otherwise, staff recommends that the commission review and approve the proposed project, subject to the updated findings and conditions of approval. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Commissioners have any questions for staff? Seeing none, why don't we open it to public comment?
Hello?
Good evening.
Is this good? Yeah, sorry. I know that sometimes
Sounds
we
good.
get a little too. Okay. So, hi, my name is Kenzo Sung, and I'm the next door neighbor at 913 Santa Fe, where I live with my partner and 2 children. While we know that nothing is ever set in stone, my family originally purchased the house based on its location with particular consideration to level, sun, and privacy for an Albany home. So last fall, our neighbors had a design approved to extend the second floor story depth by 10 feet with an additional 10-foot depth pergola or trellis. Prior, I went to City Hall to review the plans with Leslie Mendez and voice my family's privacy and some blockage concerns. She suggested I discuss these with my neighbors, who we generally have good relations. So, I did, and we came to a compromise, so I let Leslie know that I would not speak at the hearing. However, this modified plan to further increase the second-story depth to 16.5 feet will substantively worsen existing concerns regarding shade and privacy impact that my family thought we had already come to an understanding. Regarding the shade impact, as the neighboring house to the north, the extended addition will create a substantial shadow throughout much more of the day as the sun moves across the sky. And the prior extension would already directly block the direct sunlight to much of the kitchen, but leave our dining and living rooms with at least some midday and afternoon sun. The extended addition and pergola would now decrease direct sunlight to our dining and living rooms for much more of the day, with particular impact to the south-facing dining room, which, with its bright and sunny feel, is really the familial center and most used room in our house, where we eat, where my kids and I work, play, host guests, stuff like that. Similarly, regarding privacy impact, the modified addition would have side windows that directly overlook our kitchen and now our dining room with the extension, as well as provide an easy line of sight to look down on our living room side windows from both the addition and the pergola. Regarding possible alternatives, our ideal would be to maintain the original design, which would already extend the house, the second story, by 10 feet, or at least lessen the additional depth to, say, 13 feet instead of 16.5, and the pergola depth by 3 feet too. This said, if there is a irreconcilable structural issue, and as my neighbor mentioned prior, that they preferred the original plan too, and were advised to extend further due to possible structural concerns, that perhaps at least 2 ideas are: one, to reduce the pergola depth or trellis depth by a similar 6.5 feet that it extended for the addition, from say a 10-foot to a 3.5, 4-foot pergola, which when I talked to our neighbors prior said they were potentially open to, as well as having a pergola top more open. And also the second one is, and/or to keep the new roof line as low as feasible, which they also said they were potentially open to maintain and, so that they could get more sun, as well as maintain the position of the existing roof line and second-story windows, which are both offset a bit to the south if you look at the design from the front, and for the new porch windows and pergola, so that both are a bit offset from the north wall to minimize the shade and privacy impact while maintaining the original home's aesthetic. So that's it. So yeah, thank you so much for hearing my concerns and potential impact and alternatives, and
Okay.
I'm willing to discuss.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Is there anyone else in the audience who would like to speak? Or how about, we have a architect or designer speak to the changes and
Hello, my name is Scott Galka. This is the third time we've been here for this project, actually. So what did happen is we didn't have a structural engineer at the beginning because we're only going for planning approval. And then once we got into the project with our structural engineer and submitted it for a building permit, started that process, the structural engineer pointed out that the point load we were extending the building was not a good spot structurally. So now we wanted to move it over so it aligns with an existing bearing wall inside the house. I'm not even sure if it could be possible to do it where we had it originally, unless we put some steel in and a lot of other expensive options. So this was the most logical way to actually get this thing so we could build it. The other thing I wanted to just point out is when we first submitted for this, we did not, we pulled the building back to the 3'8" on that side. And from direction from you guys, you wanted us to continue the existing line, the existing 3'2", so that the house, the addition felt like it was part of the original house. And we agreed to do that, and I think the owner had to pay $3,000 to make that happen. We are open to looking at the trellis to pull it back. The trellis is actually a very open trellis. It's a steel trellis with not a lot of horizontal elements on it. We're open to having that discussion. I don't think moving it back 3 feet would address the issue with the structural. So that's it.
any commissioners have any questions for the architect? No? Okay.
I do have a question. The general member talked about privacy and also just like the shading. So can you just talk more through like how you planned that? It sounds like there's been conversations between both parties, and I'd just love to hear more about how that's more planned out.
Yeah, so the existing second floor that we're extending was a flat roof, and we extended that flat roof, but we had to raise it another, I think, 18 inches because the sitting area we're building on had to meet the roof deck that we're going on to the outside. So we raised it just enough to get an 8-foot ceiling. It's still a flat roof. We still put a parapet on there to match the other parapet, but it does step up. And then for privacy, we have one window in the sitting area that's a transom window. So it's 5 feet off the ground and 6'8" at the top. So it's not, no one's going to be looking down through that window. And then there's one window on that side that's an existing window in the bathroom. So we did not add many windows, and no windows that I think threaten any privacy. And then the other thing that we do with the roof deck is we're doing planters around the roof deck so that you won't be standing right up against the property. You'll be standing at least 2 feet back from the edge. That should affect the views into the house next door. And the other thing is the trellis has also been pulled back 2 feet from the room
Okay.
to try and ameliorate some of the shadows.
Yeah. Thank you for the clarification.
Okay, we can close public comment and move on to commissioner discussion. Are there any online? Or
Yes, let's make sure. If you would like, if you're participating online and would like to speak on this issue, please use the raise the hand icon found at the bottom of your screen. No, no one does wish to speak.
Okay, then we will move on to commissioner discussion. Does anyone have any comments?
Happy to chime in.
Wadi, please.
Sure, happy to jump in. Overall, I'm still supportive of the final project. I'm a little disappointed that figuring out where the structural beam wasn't figured out sort of on the first pass. I feel like that should be a pretty basic consideration when coming forward with a vertical addition. But nonetheless, I absolutely understand the need to ultimately align the addition with the underlying structural members to make this project work. I think practically speaking, this is only a partial second-story addition. This is well under the height limit. I think it's just to be expected that, if somebody has a home next to you and they're below the permissible height limits, that there's the expectation that it could go up. In reality, I don't think this is going to cast, any more shadow than the trees on the neighbor's property or casting on their neighbor's property. I mean, I think it's just sort of a part of, a somewhat dense environment. And, I'd certainly encourage you guys, I appreciate that you two originally, talked together and tried to work it out, and I encourage you guys to still continue, those open lines of communication. I think practically speaking, there are probably more use-related adjustments that you can make to be good neighbors about, noise up there and how you intend to use it, and, maybe plant buffers or, things like that that are less regulated by the planning department. But nonetheless, with that, I think this is an appropriate addition. Had this come in originally the first time, I would have been supportive of it. It's set back from the street. It's preserving the existing sort of architectural integrity of the home. And I don't see any finding or justification for why this isn't contextual. There are many other homes, both in this part of town and throughout the city, that have very similar additions and conditions, and I think this is an appropriate addition, can make all the findings. So that concludes my remarks.
Okay, thank you. Other comments?
I support the project as designed.
I would agree with Commissioner Wadi. I think it is still just a partial second-story addition. In theory, it could be a full second-story addition all the way across. And I understand the structural problems. Bearing walls are important. Otherwise, you would need a steel moment frame, probably, which would be quite expensive and difficult to integrate into the existing house. As far as some of the privacy questions, I think the windows, like the architect said, are high enough up. I don't think they're really going to allow views down into the neighboring house or yard, mostly looking up or level out. And then it's, as far as the use of the roof deck, I think we already approved that. We had that discussion, and we had no problems with it. And we just would ask neighbors to be considerate of each other's noise levels and all that. So I'm happy to support the project as is already. I mean, again, as Commissioner Wadi mentioned, if this had come to us in this form originally, we would have approved it. And I do support the extension of the non-conforming wall. Bring that non-conforming wall in, whatever, a few inches creates its own other set of difficult structural problems as well, and it's not seismically as safe. It's, visually a little bit awkward, and we've approved many, many other non-conforming vertical exceptions in town because we have narrow lots, and we are not trying to put obstacles in the way of people rebuilding or remodeling their houses. So it's part of living in a small lot community that these things are going to happen, and people are able to build up and out, and it's just the way things are. So with that, I think we could move on to a motion.
Sure, I'm happy to make a motion to approve item 4-4 as proposed.
Second, who will second?
I will second.
Commissioner Wadi?
Aye.
Commissioner Momin?
Yes.
Commissioner Liebenow?
Yes.
And I will vote yes as well, so that passes 4-0. I don't know if there's still story polls up, or if that's moot at this point, or
There are no story poles because there was no change in height over the previously approved.
Okay, so the project has been approved. Thank you very much. Okay, that concludes item 4, consent calendar. And with that, we will move on to item 5, announcements, communications, discussion. Staff already made one announcement about.
Yes, our most exciting announcement is we have a new graduate student intern for the summer, Dana Morgan. So I just wanted to let her introduce herself, let you know what she's doing in her studies, as well as what we've hired her for this summer.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dana Morgan. I'm pursuing a Master of City Planning at UC Berkeley right now, and I just completed my first year. And then I'll be working on a few different projects within the planning team. I'll be helping out with design review on the staff side, as well as looking into housing discrimination, the history within the city, as well as looking at possible outreach strategies that the Community Development Office could use now and in the future, as well as a few other projects that I'll be working on throughout the summer. But
All right, great. Great to have you here.
thank you.
All right. Any other announcements?
Nope.
Nope. All right, thank you. So we will move on to item 6, public comment. For persons desiring to address the commission on an item that is not on the agenda, please note that each speaker is limited to 3 minutes. The Brown Act limits the commission's ability to take and/or discuss items that are not on the agenda. Therefore, such items are normally referred to staff for comment or to a future agenda. Is there anyone who would like to make a public comment? Yes, please come to the podium. I'm sorry, I can't hear you if you're not speaking into the mic.
Assistant, my wife, Dr. Marks, assists me with some visuals.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, members of the Planning and Zoning Commission. I'm Dr. Stephen Albert. I appeared before you on April 24 to ask why the city follows only the minimum state mandate, notifying those within 300 feet of new construction, regardless of project size, when in fact citywide alerts are permissible. Why were only 73 properties notified of the 5-story mixed commercial residential structure proposed for 1600 Solano Avenue? Commission members know I again presented this issue to the City Council on Monday because you have received a copy of my remarks. The salient portion of my remarks was my accusation that 2 city officials, Councilman Jordan and Community Development Director Bond, invented and cited non-existent state law to avoid addressing the issue of 300 feet notification. The veracity of these serious allegations is thoroughly documented in the city record, which you have all reviewed. However, the general public has not had access to this. Thus, tonight, I will review 2 items. First, firm evidence that Director Bond falsely asserted that state laws precluded Albany from issuing citywide alerts for new construction. And second, why has Director Bond, for 2 years running, not enforced city code violations at 1600 Solano? Regarding the first item, everything I present is meticulously documented with a 6-page email forwarded to the commission members on April 30th. I am not cherry-picking favorable information. In a December 11 email responding to an Albany resident expressing concern that 300 feet was not adequate notification, Director Bond wrote, quote, "Due to a series of new laws, the city did not have the option of sending out a citywide public notice for 1600 Solano. Over the course of 1 month, I requested Director Bond to provide documentation of the state laws which mandate only 300 feet notification rather than citywide alerts. My requests were ignored. It was only pursuant to a formal request by records that Director Bond forwarded this document, Planning and Zoning Laws, Volume 2, citing Section 4A, Notification Procedures, which details the state mandate alerting those within 300 feet of new construction. Here is an exact copy of the page of notification procedures. Indeed, subsection 4A reviews 300 feet notification. However, on the very same page, subsection 5, highlighted, reads, in addition to the notice provided by this section, a local agency may give notice of a hearing in any other manner it deems necessary or desirable. Contrary to Director Bond's assertion, No state laws prevent any municipality from issuing citywide alerts for new construction. Regarding the second item, commission members received this notice, posted for almost a month along Solano Avenue. All city officials received this notice, highlighting two
All
ongoing
right,
city issues.
your time is up. Thank you.
I have only two more comments, please.
Okay.
The two issues
You-
are wildly overgrown grass and weeds and an improperly secured electric conduit. Director Bond, why over the past 2 years have you not required the absentee owners of 1600 Solano to maintain their property in accordance with city ordinances? Lastly, I'm requesting the commission members to place the issue of 300 feet notification to be submitted as a formal agenda item for a future city council meeting to allow for extended, in-depth public discussion.
Okay, thank you for your comments. I think that's,
Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
yes, all right, thank you very much. Okay, do we have any other public speakers?
Yes, we do. Hello, Bertha, you have 3 minutes.
Yes, thank you. My name is Berta Magaña, and I live a couple of blocks away from 1600 Solano. I support my neighbor's comments regarding the 300-foot public notification issue. The main reason, and I completely understand that this is a project that was approved a couple of years ago already, but I think there's a lot of relevance to possibly tonight's discussion on density bonus. The main reason why I think notification should have been given to more than just the people within 300 feet is parking. Honestly, the people that are going to go to and from that building are going to not be restricted to parking within 300 feet of that building. That is my main issue. I went back and I looked through all the documents available regarding 1600 Solano. I went back through the meetings, I looked at the videos, and I can't help but notice there's only 2 parking spots created in that building. There's 12 living units, and none of the people living in that building are going to get to use those 2 parking spots. It seems like those 2 parking spots are going to be only for the people that work in the medical offices there, and I doubt there's only 2 people working there. That's the main reason why I support the comments made by my neighbor. The second thing I couldn't help but notice is walking by, there's post live oaks inside that property. And I kept thinking, I thought you needed a permit to remove live oaks. And, this may be a city-specific thing, I don't know. If those oak trees were in Berkeley, that has an oak tree ordinance, I would need to apply for a permit to the city to cut down an oak tree, even if it's inside my property. And that's not the case in Albany. Albany doesn't have an oak tree ordinance. And these are just examples of how these density bonus laws that are passed, and which I'm really looking forward to hearing tonight's discussion on that. But they're examples of how these things actually have real world consequences. And I do look forward to hearing you speak more about density bonus, because I know this is one of the reasons why 1600 Solano got to be approved the way that it did. And I urge you to please keep in mind all these real consequences to those of us living near properties like that. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Are there any other speakers?
If anyone else wishes to speak, please raise your hand. Anyone else?
All right, seeing no more speakers, I am going to close the public comment section, and we will move on to item 7. And item 7-1, density bonus implementation presentation. And staff, you have a presentation for us?
Great. Well, thank you for coming. And the last item on tonight's agenda are revisions to the density bonus ordinance. And while I do realize that there are some experts in this room, for those of you who are not exposed to density bonus on a regular basis, I thought it would be useful to provide a summary of density bonus law and its implementation. So this is a 2-part presentation. I will take questions from the commissioners after the first segment. And then again, after the second segment, but I do suggest that we hold off opening the public comment until after the full presentation.
Till after the second item.
Exactly.
Okay.
So originally enacted in 1979, California Density Bonus Law, which is codified in the Government Code, Section 65915 and following section, requires a city to allow a developer to increase density for a housing project above the maximum allowable density under the jurisdiction zoning ordinance or general plan in exchange for including a certain percentage of the units as affordable. In addition to an increase in density, the law requires cities to grant qualifying projects a larger package of incentives intended to help make the development of affordable housing economically feasible. And this includes actual incentives or concessions that provide for cost reductions for that affordable housing, waivers of development standards that would physically preclude or prevent the development of that density bonus project, and reductions in parking requirements, which, however, is not relevant in our city since we did eliminate parking minimums last fall. So in order to qualify for a density bonus, a project must consist of 5 or more units and provide, as I mentioned, a certain percentage of affordability or senior housing within the project. And this includes 10% of the units for sale or rent to lower income households, 5% to very low income households, 10% of units for sale to moderate income households, 10% of units for rent at very low income to transitional foster youth, disabled veterans, or homeless persons, 20% of the total units for lower income students in a student housing development, or a senior citizen housing development or senior mobile home park. And unless specifically noted, the percentages of affordable units excludes the bonus units, the density bonus units. So when we talk about household income, limits are set by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, and are based on local surveys of area median income. So acutely low is 0 to 15% of AMI, which is area median income. Extremely low is 15 to 30%. Very low is 30 to 50. Low income is 50 to 80. Low income, and also known more commonly as lower income, could also mean anything under 80% of AMI. And moderate income is 80 to 120% of AMI. And just for the record, the AMI for a family of 4 in Alameda County for 2023 was $147,900. So there are 4 basic steps in implementing density bonus. One is to calculate the maximum allowable or base density. Next is to calculate the density bonus, then determine the eligible concessions, and finally determine the waivers or reductions of the development and/or design standards that are needed to accommodate the project. And I'll go into each of these in a little more detail. So first, we have the density bonus calculation. And we are using an example lot of 5,112 square feet, which is 0.117 acres, which is located in the Solano Commercial Zoning District, which does have a maximum residential standard of 63 dwelling units per acre, both in our zoning ordinance and our general plan. The maximum density is therefore the acreage times 63, which is 7.3, which rounds up to 8 units is the maximum density on this site. State density bonus law requires that all calculations of units round up to the next nearest number. So this project, which to employ a density bonus, so they dedicated or they committed to providing 15% of the units, the base units, as very low income, and 15% of 8 is 1.2, which rounds up to 2. So this project has 2 units dedicated to very low income, as visually represented by the pink windows. So in order, next you calculate the amount of the density bonus. And the amount of the bonus is determined by the unit type, whether it's senior housing, family housing, transitional housing for transitional foster youth. The affordability level, again, ranging anywhere from very low income to moderate income, as well as the percentage of affordable units that are included in the project. There are also additional bonuses available for other eligible project amenities, including childcare facilities and land donations. So to find the actual density bonus allocation, you do go to the Government Code Section 65915 that has several tables. Here is a summary of the density bonus allocations for both low income as well as very low income units. And for this sample project, providing 15% very low income units, you can see they are eligible for a 50% bonus. So with a maximum density of 8 units, with a 50% bonus, that's 4 additional units shown here in the blue, for a total of 12 units. You will notice I rearranged my pink affordable units to make sure that those are evenly distributed throughout the project. So next is to determine the concessions to which the project is eligible. And density bonus projects are entitled to a specified number of incentive or concessions as specified by state density bonus law. And concessions are defined as a reduction or modification in development or design standards, approval of mixed-use zoning in conjunction with the housing project, or any other regulatory incentive or concession proposed by the project sponsor. The main thing is that concessions are required to provide for affordable housing costs. So again, in state density bonus law in section D2 outlines the number of concessions that various projects are eligible for. And this table is a summary of that information. And you can see that our sample project at 15% VLI is eligible to receive 3 concessions. So although the project sponsor can request any type of concession, provided it provides for affordable housing costs, some of the most common ones are reductions in parking or usable open space, taller floor-to-ceiling heights, as well as allowing residential units on the ground floor in those districts where residential units are prohibited on the ground floor. And then finally, once you have your density bonus project with the concessions, you need to determine what waivers are required of the development or design standards that would physically preclude the construction of that project. And there are no limit on the numbers of waivers because we have to allow that project. So a way to think about it is a project with the maximum residential density tends to essentially max out the development standards of the property or the massing. Therefore, when you add those bonus units, essentially something's got to give. So the most common waivers are increases in height, FAR, lot coverage, which I don't have here, decreases in setbacks or stepbacks, and reductions or elimination of parking or open space requirements. And finally, project sponsors are required to enter into an affordable housing agreement with the city to ensure continued affordability of such units. Density bonus law does require that qualifying affordable units remain affordable for a duration of 55 years. However, most projects in the city that employ density bonus are also subject to the city's inclusionary housing ordinance, which is 15%. And you may use your qualifying density bonus units for your qualifying inclusionary housing units, provided the affordability levels are consistent. And our ordinance requires that those affordable units be affordable in perpetuity. So for those units that are also inclusionary units, they will be affordable in perpetuity. So that is part one, just the basic density bonus implementation. And I wanted to stop there just to see if there's any questions up to this point.
Do any commissioners have any questions for staff? Commissioner Moment?
Yes.
That's a question. Is there any residential zoning district or any mixed-use zoning district that is not allowed to use density bonus?
No. No. As long as it's a district that allows housing units and as long as there's 5 units or more, you are eligible to use density bonus.
Well, let's see. I guess the only comment I would make is that the exercise here tonight is that we are trying to bring our city ordinances in conformance with state law. That's the main goal of this.
So we will get to that in part when we get to the next item. However, just before jumping into revisions of the density bonus ordinance, I thought it would be useful for anyone on the commission or in the audience to review exactly what it is we're going to be revising.
Yeah, great. I mean, I think it was an excellent, very clear presentation, so thank you for that.
Great. So now, part two. As I mentioned, there are 4 main steps to implementing density bonus, and the first one is to calculate the maximum allowable or base density. So the question is, do you know how I can, hold on. How do you calculate the maximum allowable or base density in a zoning district that does not have a maximum density standard, such as the San Pablo Commercial District? Now, luckily for us, we are not the first jurisdiction to have this dilemma, and other jurisdictions have come up with a process that has been both vetted by the courts as well as, I don't know if embraced is the right word, but embraced by HCD. So that I will attempt to share with you tonight. So first, I'd like to introduce the term of residential floor area, or RFA. Residential floor area is the gross or total horizontal area on or above the first or main floor that serves the residential use, such as circulation to areas used by residents, meaning hallways, residential amenities such as exercise rooms, lounges, or secure bicycle parking, mail rooms, and lobby areas. RFA does not include mechanical or utility rooms, inner courts, shaft enclosures, or areas dedicated to vehicle parking. So the definition of residential floor area actually mirrors our definition in our zoning ordinance for gross floor area. However, residential floor area is that gross floor area that is for residential use only. And the reason we look at RFA is because when we kind of mentioned before, the maximum residential density is essentially how much floor area do you get. And so when we have to determine the maximum allowed floor area and then convert it to dwelling units, since state density bonus law works in the unit of dwelling units and not floor area. So the first thing is to define the base project. And the conditions are, which is to find the maximum residential floor area in a way that complies with all design and development standards of the zoning code and any specific plan requirements, as well as complies with all building and fire codes. So here in this axonometric, it is a sample building that meets the maximum height, the required setbacks, has the required commercial space on the ground floor. The gray is area for parking and mechanical rooms, and the green is the required open space. And we do calculate then the maximum blue area or the residential area. So typically, however, developers won't provide an axonometric. That's, I think, just a better visual to show the height and kind of the layout. But we'll show it like floor plan per floor plan. So for the base project, you can see here, they show plan by plan what is at every level. And you will notice this is a district that didn't allow residential units on the ground floor, but there is some blue on the ground floor, but those are the lobby, the mailroom, and bicycle parking and such. There is the green usable open space, the yellow commercial, and gray area that's dedicated to vehicle parking, required trash areas, mechanical rooms, and the like. So this is, as you can also see from the floor plan, it's more a concept based on the allowable floor area of this area divided into a certain number of units. Next, you also do the same thing for the proposed project. Now, that might seem a little contradictory, like how would you know what the proposed project is if we haven't found the base project density? But as I mentioned, what we're essentially looking at is the floor area and what is allowed, so one can figure that out and then convert it to units. And when developers do look at a property, they look at what they can build, and they look at what unit type, unit size will work and pencil out for that property. And so this is the proposed project, and as you can see, it has a lot more detail, but yet it does lay out what are the proposed residential areas, and the part in blue is what we calculate, the gray is the required parking, yellow commercial space, and the like. So next is how to determine the base number of units. And what, again, is, since we do have to calculate that square footage into units, we use the average unit size of the proposed project. And to get this, we take the residential floor area of the proposed project divided by the number of units in the proposed project to get the average unit size. Now, to be clear, this average unit size is for density bonus calculation purposes only and will be larger than the actual unit size because that doesn't include hallway space, lobby space, and the like. Once we have the average unit size, we take the residential floor area of the base project and divide it by that average unit size to get the base number of units, or what we would consider the maximum allowable or base density of our site. So a little bit of this is an Excel calculator that's available. The table on the bottom left, the right column is the residential floor area of the proposed project. The left column is the residential floor area of the base project. And in the green little boxes, you have the proposed area of essentially the calculation for average unit size, which takes the proposed area of the proposed project divided by the units to get that average unit size. And then you go to the top. The first column is the base project RFA, or the residential floor area. The average unit size, the base number of projects is the base project divided by the average unit size, which is 76.99, which again rounds up to 77 units. So this sample lot has 77 units as the base project. And again, this project committed to 11% affordable at very low income. 11% of 77 is 8.47, so 9 units are committed to be available to very low income. This provided the project developer with a 35% bonus. 35% of 77 is 26.95, which rounds up to 27 units. The bonus units are 27 plus the 77 base makes for a total of 104 units. The requested concessions for this, just actual project, were to reduce the open space and to reduce the parking to 0. And then we get our density bonus project. And just pick this project in particular. I think it's 1600 San Pablo Avenue. It is right across from McDonald's, so it is our neighbor. It will be just right south of us. So anyway, that is my second part of the presentation. And again, I am here to answer any questions you have.
Okay, thank you. We have questions from the Commission. Nawadi?
Yeah, I just had a quick question. Thank you. This was very helpful and all clear as can be. One question that I had, though, is I know this January the state modified the density bonus law with AB 1287, which is sort of affectionately the double density bonus. Just curious if we've sort of tackled that yet, or if we're doing this one piece at a time in order to, I know this is sort of part 2 of the presentation, but just as we went through that presentation, that looked like sort of the typical density bonus, singular versus the double?
So the way, it should not affect the ordinance, which we'll get to next, and we'll get to why. And it shouldn't affect how we calculate density bonus, because we would refer to the density, to the state ordinance, to see, to the state law to see what applies. Which is a sneak peek to the next item, which we'll get to about the state updating their law.
Great, but obviously I know this was a good primer, but folks could do more than that 50% bonus should they choose to use 1287 as sort of the punchline.
Correct, yes, yeah,
Okay, great, thank you.
yes.
Other questions? Mr. Momin?
I had a related question. You included that in your staff report for the next presentation. So wanted to know like what would be the base project for the double density bonus? Would that be still the base project or would that be base project plus first density bonus?
So it should be the base project. And again, apologies, probably Commissioner Wada, you could answer that. I'm not quite up to date on this law. I tend to wait till they get enacted and before I do it. But that said, the density bonus is based on the base project or the maximum density, and then any additional bonuses are based on that, unless they change the state law to do consecutive bonuses, which they do with the, as I mentioned, you get additional bonuses for childcare and land donations. So there may be a time, if not this time, where they will do kind of consecutive bonuses.
And my understanding is you have to maximize the first bonus fully before you can utilize the secondary bonus. So you kind of do the math, part one, part two. But the base density is always the base project, what's allowed under zoning, and then bonuses, bonus.
So it would be like 100% is the base density if you get like let's say 20%.
Speak into the microphone.
So 100% is your base density. If you get 50% bonus, your project becomes 50% in terms of number of units or HAR. And then if you want to apply for double density bonus.
Is your microphone on? Oh, there we go.
Okay, so your base project is 100%, let's say, and then you get a density bonus, let's say 50%. So your project becomes 150%. Now you are applying for double density bonus. Then would that be calculated based on 100% or 150%?
No, based on 100%.
100%. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So
It's not 50% of 150. It's 50. It's another 50% of 100. Is my understanding. But again, I don't do the implementation these days.
okay. Yeah. So my sorry.
Go ahead.
Yep. My second next question was about this calculation is very useful, and that's what we had I think talked about when we were I think during some previous density bonus discussions or something. Similarly, we have kind of a tricky situation on Solano commercial too, where we have maximum density allowable, and when we have FAR also. Unfortunately, the FAR doesn't correlate with the maximum allowable density. There we have 63 dwelling units per acre allowed, but the FAR is just 1.25. And so if you use that FAR, you cannot get the density. And so we need some kind of methodology, developed for Solano commercial, similar to what we are doing here. And I also want to know, this presentation was very useful for us to understand, but would there be any way to include that in some, or document that somewhere so future applicants could use that, so there is kind of a uniformity in calculation for your review?
So if I understand the question, is regarding kind of the disparity we have in our zoning ordinance regarding maximum density, which can be quite a little bit more permissive than the FAR, which is more restrictive.
Right.
And I think when you are doing a project without density bonus, that does come into conflict because the FAR will restrict your maximum development potential.
Exactly, yeah.
Which is another bonus, not to be punny here, of using density bonus, because the base project is actually based on the residential density. So probably just the base project in many districts already requires waivers because you will be exceeding FAR if it's a very limiting
Okay.
FAR. So,
So
it's-
is there any clear direction for a precedence? Like, means I didn't find that in code, like, of course, during administrative process, you accept the interpretation based on the maximum allowable density, but there is no clear indication that, they should follow that.
Right, so for density bonus, there is a clear, very direct indication from the state to use the density, residential density, maximum residential density as the standard for the base
I
project.
see. Okay.
And in addition, just to expand a little further, they clarified as well that it should be the highest maximum residential density of either the zoning ordinance or the general plan. And that came from similarly, some jurisdictions had kind of quite a range of residential density in the general plan, but the zoning ordinance was a lot more restrictive. So to, again, further production of housing, and again, not just housing, but affordable housing, the state keeps clarifying that we're using the most expansive definition and permissive definitions to achieve those means. So.
Okay, so I looked through the track changes? Have we included that kind of reference in that, or they would be relying on the state law for
We
that?
are relying on the state law for density bonus, and I know, I think the chair, among others, you have brought up just for regular projects, just that kind of inconsistency, so that might be something for this commission to address in the future.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Liebenow, questions for staff?
Yeah, I had a quick question. So can you go back a slide, perchance?
Said she.
Maybe number 23, slide 23. Oh, yes, perfect. I usually come from a place of being equity-minded and also having served a lot of diverse communities who are low income and dealing with like social economic challenges. When this says concession, the goal is to like reduce open space, to reduce parking to zero. It kind of gives me a little bit of a concern because most people who may qualify for affordable housing are people who require some form of parking. And maybe this is a conversation for the future, but these are just something to keep in mind. And I don't know if this is railing off of the convo, but I am wondering if part of this, I'm more curious about how we can be inclusive to the needs of people who are low income and may qualify for affordable housing with that respect as well.
Yeah, no, I really respect that comment. So we actually, I think more City Council, when we were removing parking minimums, there was a discussion of imposing parking maximums, and they were ultimately adopted, but for commercial properties only, because there was that discussion that some folks are reliant on their vehicle, if you have a gig work. So yes, we are aware of it. However, state density bonus law is more concerned on the construction of housing than they are on the construction of parking spaces or open space, because I think that's another one. Maybe not in the city of Albany, but in maybe some denser communities, there might not be a lot of open space. And so there's a little like, well, how can, you're building this housing, but you don't have a usable open space. So I think those are valid concerns to address. However, jurisdictions are not able to require it when the state says we cannot. So it's often, however, I would say that the developers are pretty cognizant of the community that they're serving or wishing to house and tend to build for that community. So, we don't require parking anymore, but a lot of developers still want to because it makes sense for who's will be living in their homes.
I may just need to do a little more research on my end. I do, however, want to say that parking can be a contentious thing, and I recognize that there's the state kind of like what we want to follow based on the state, but I also want to recognize that if parking is not an included benefit, it does make it challenging for people to actually apply to live here, because there's even conversations about, like, you know, how are people going to afford to live in affordable housing? We can have the shortage, and then we can have the supply meet the shortage, but if it's not affordable or accessible by transit and all these things, I guess what I'm asking for is just more information around the inclusivity piece of this and how we can be equity-minded. Yeah.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
If I can just jump in too, just with a couple thoughts, I think it's helpful to know, you know, density bonus law has been around since 1979. This isn't a new law. It's newly being utilized in California because of a court case in 2013 in the city of Napa, or Napa County. But all of those rules around a developer's ability to waive all these standards is based in state law and has been affirmed through the courts. So like local cities just don't have a say over saying, oh, hey, in our community, we think this is important or we value it. We legally don't have a standing. And if we don't comply with those state laws, we risk jeopardizing our housing element. And if our housing element is decertified, you can lose grant funding for affordable housing and for transportation. So there's actually, ironically, you know, those are the consequences, even if the intent is, hey, we think parking's important for affordable housing. If we mandated people to do that, it actually undermines building affordable housing through affordable housing dollars. So, I mean, I think all of those are really, you know, valid concerns, but unfortunately, you know, both the state legislature as well as our court system has really hamstrung our ability to make any deviation from those rules. So I think that's an important just sort of piece of context and history to understand here when it comes to density bonus. You know, this is not like Albany deciding what's right for Albany. This is really us complying with a state statute, and I think people who really feel strongly about those kind of nuances within state law should advocate to their state elected officials who are making these laws. But I also think, you know, the broader context, and I was going to say this commentary under the next part, but I might as well say it now. I think it's appropriate, is to also understand why there's a lot of these really stringent oversight and more recent regulations related to housing that are coming in now. And so much of it is based on the fact that, you know, when legal housing discrimination was made illegal, what many wealthy cities did, particularly in California, use zoning rules like low density, high lot areas, parking standards as the way to keep the other out in communities that were very white and homogenous and you know, middle class and above middle class. And so they use these sort of dog whistle terms through zoning to really keep people out and keep densification. I think a lot of people miss that part of history, that is so much of what our zoning codes today in most nice neighborhoods in California are really based in discriminatory principles at their heart, but they were not allowed to be overt. So they used zoning as their guise, and that passed for decades and decades. And so many of the efforts of late are, yes, they're impactful. Yes, it's going to impact parking, and that stinks, and that sucks for everyone's day-to-day life, right? I mean, I think we can all acknowledge that, but it's the trying to overcompensate for decades of sort of smoke and mirrors used through zoning to keep people who are different, who are out, who might be less fortunate out from our communities, and to keep a very certain aesthetic in our communities. So I think just keeping that in context when we get frustrated with the like here and now of like, oh, this is too tall, oh, there's not enough parking, this is changing the way our neighborhood feels. Our neighborhood has never changed in the decades that I've lived here. Well, why hasn't it changed? What were those rules? Why were those rules put into place in the first place? What were they trying to protect? Who are they trying to keep out? And I think just sort of realizing that broader context is helpful, because we all, I think, get very used to like what directly impacts my day-to-day, and that's fair. But I think just keeping that broader context is really important when we're talking about implementing housing laws and you know, things like density bonus. So I just wanted to share sort of my 2 cents and a little bit of that context, which I think is helpful for these conversations.
If I may, I think I'd like to move to public comment, and then actually this would be more appropriate for our discussion after public comment, but we've sort of blended that a little bit, which is fine. But I think we should
Will call.
comment
So
on
if,
item 7-1.
yep. So if anyone wishes to speak on this item, either come up to the dais or use the raise the hand icon.
Thank you for your comments. The My Pet project at 1600 Solano Avenue. we were
Excuse me,
told-
can we reset the timer?
It'd be
All right,
brief.
just give us a second, let you start again. You'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Won't need 3 minutes.
Pardon?
Won't need full 3 minutes.
That's plenty, because it's part of our valuable time as well.
But I'm going to time you this way. Okay,
Okay.
go
well,
for it.
Okay, go ahead, please.
I'll mispronounce your name, Miss
Libunao.
Yes, thank you. I very much appreciate your comments because we were told by Aaron Tiedemann and Preston Jordan that everyone at 1600 Solano Avenue is going to ride bikes. And that is so unrealistic in today's world. But that's how 1600 Solano Avenue is sold to us, is to not have any parking. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Would anyone else in the room like to speak? Any online speakers?
Any online public comment? Please use the raise the hand icon. Yes. Bertha, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Hi, I completely appreciate all the comments regarding the history of discrimination in housing and all of that. I've worked extremely hard to be able to afford a house where I live now, and historically I would never have been able to do that. But I also appreciate the comments regarding how people that can only afford lower income housing are very, very highly dependent on, driving to places because of the types of work that, people have and stuff. So those are really hard things to balance. And I understand what you said all about, how old these density bonus laws are and everything. But it seems like we live in an already very sort of dense area here near Solano Avenue, and you all have talked also about making references to what other jurisdictions do, and I just kind of want to point out Beverly Hills is an example. If you search online for it, you can find a lot of really interesting things that they've done with these areas where commercial meets residential, and one of the things that they've done is take the community into account, and I just really would love to encourage that to happen in the future, because I think that, like I said, those of us that live even past the 300 feet are affected by these things. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments. Are there others?
No one else has raised their hand.
No one else. Okay, then I will close public comment and bring it back to the commission for discussion. And if my understanding is correct, this is not an action item, just an information presentation.
Exactly.
So I will bring it back to the commission for any further comments before we move on to the next section of this. Commissioner Libidao?
Yeah, I want to thank you, Commissioner Wadi, for just giving some more context. I think there's a lot going on. There's a lot of background at play. I think my request in the future is that there may be a slide that's focused on just like the equity impacts, just so that it's a little bit more clear, and definitely need to do a lot of learning on my end and more research on my end. But yeah, I'm grateful to be here. Yeah, thank you.
Any other comments? Commissioner Wadi, Commissioner Moment? Well, I have a few comments. I mean, the overall picture here, the big picture is that the state has decided that local communities can no longer put up major obstacles to housing. And the whole goal of this state density bonus law is to increase housing because we have an acute housing shortage in the state of California. And in the Bay Area in particular, it's quite bad. And we have a housing element that we have complied with, that we have provided to the city, to the state, which obligates us to provide, I think it's 1,200, what is it, like 1,238 units of housing over the next 8 years, of which a very large percentage of those units have to be very low income affordable and low income affordable. So this is a much bigger picture than just Solano Avenue or San Pablo Avenue. We've raised our density standards, our development standards along along San Pablo Avenue. And to meet our housing element, we are supposed to raise those standards across the city. We are not supposed to concentrate them in one area. So all areas of the city should be included with higher densities to meet our housing element, and hopefully, ultimately bring housing costs down and provide inclusionary units for lower income people. So in that sense, this is the big picture. It's not us trying to, just get rid of parking. But to that point about parking also, parking units, one parking unit can cost $50,000. So what does that do to the cost of an apartment or even a low-income unit? That tacks $50,000 onto the cost of producing that, and that gets translated into rent. So one of the goals of reducing parking is to reduce the cost per unit to rent it. It also frees up more space within that building envelope for more units. So it is a policy choice. Do you want more parking for vehicles, or do you want more housing for people? So that's kind of where the trade-off is. And I err on the side, or I'm more for the side of providing more housing units and less parking and less expensive housing. So that's what I consider to be the priorities here. And the state is making us do this because so many communities have been resistant. So that's kind of the big picture. And then in terms of mode shift, we do want more people to bike and take transit, but that is a shift that happens over time, and it happens with more transit infrastructure. But that is also a goal of our climate action and other state goals as well. So that's the end of my comments. So I think we can close item 7-1 and move on to item 7-2. Thank you.
Okay, good evening. Thank you for that great discussion. And now we will turn to the density bonus and housing provision ordinance update for your review and hopeful recommendation to City Council for adoption. So as mentioned, originally enacted in 1975, the California density bonus law requires cities to allow a developer to increase density for a housing project above the maximum allowable density of the zoning ordinance or the general plan in exchange for the inclusion of certain percentage of the units as affordable. In addition to the increase in density, the law requires cities to grant qualifying projects a larger package of incentives intended to help make development of affordable housing economically feasible. This includes the incentives and concessions that provide cost reductions, waivers of development standards that would physically preclude the development of the project at the densities permitted and with the incentives granted of the density bonus project, and reductions in parking. The purposes of the zoning code's housing provisions section is to advance the goals of the housing element of the Albany General Plan, specifically to provide a variety of housing to meet the needs of all economic segments of the community and to expand housing opportunities to those with special needs, including the elderly, persons with disabilities, and those experiencing homelessness. The housing provision section includes the city's local ordinance for inclusionary housing, as well as density bonus, as well as our density bonus ordinance. Since the city last updated our density bonus ordinance in July of 2018 to further incentivize the inclusion of affordable housing within new development, the state legislature has amended state density bonus law on an annual basis. So it's expanded, the changes are expanded in more detail, but still abbreviated in Table 1 of the staff report. However, this slide highlights specific updates over the years that have rendered our local ordinance out of date and non-compliant. So this includes different categories of housing that qualify for density bonus, including student housing, as well as increases in maximum density and numbers of concessions that various projects can receive. So the purpose of these amendments are three. One is to bring the density bonus ordinance into compliance with state law. The second is to streamline the density bonus approval process in line with one of our housing element programs, as well as to reorganize provisions for inclusionary and housing and density bonus for clarity and ease of understanding. So as I mentioned, the state has amended the density bonus law on an annual basis, and there is no evidence to suggest that this trend will discontinue. In fact, there are 3 current bills in this legislative session that are still alive and may amend state density bonus law further. This includes AB 9654, which would expand the definition of a development under density bonus law to include a residential care facility for the elderly. AB 3116, which would increase the number of incentives for projects that include at least 20% of total student housing units for lower income students from 1 to 2. And AB 2560 would remove the coastal zones exemption from the state density bonus law, which doesn't affect Albany, but it also adds a provision that grants incentives to projects that are at least 16% affordable to very low income or at least 45% affordable to moderate income. Therefore, ordinance has been amended to, instead of quote tables from state law, is to actually refer to those sections. This will prevent obsolescence by creating a dynamic update with annual revisions to state law. I just want to do a shout out to Alfred Tu. If you do not know this artist, they are an amazing tracker of all housing laws going through the state legislature. So the second goal is the streamlining and actually to comply with housing element program amendments. Housing element program 2I, that's a capital I, is for density bonus, which is to update the density bonus ordinance to eliminate the requirement that all bonuses, incentives, and concessions must be approved by City Council, and to increase awareness and understanding of density bonus, including requirements for concessions and waivers. So the current draft ordinance before you removes the requirement of council approval for affordable housing, for council approval of density bonus projects. We have also added in the removal of the requirement that City Council approve the affordable housing agreement, as this is essentially, it's an encapsulation of what the entitled project actually has committed to. So there is no actual discretionary action involved, and it ends up being one more public hearing that the project has to go through. So I will note that of all the amendments, even though if you look at the track changes version of the ordinance updates, it looks quite messy. But these are the only amendments that are actually substantive policy changes to the revisions before you tonight, which is the elimination of council approval for density bonus projects. And finally, the third set of amendments are what I would call the ordinance simplification amendments. This includes ordinance terminology, updated ordinance terminology to classify folks as persons with disabilities and those experience homelessness. Definitions, define words that only appear in the housing provision section have been removed from the general zoning ordinance definition section to the housing provision section. In addition, any definition that was not defined anywhere, but only included in definitions, was eliminated. Also, definitions were updated to ensure consistency with state law. State density bonus law has very specific definitions for terminology within state density bonus law. Next are what I would call the administrative requirements amendments, and this is to allow flexibility in application in response to a changing environment. We have removed that the ordinance codify that the content of the affordable housing agreement and that the content of what is required for submittal of a density bonus project to be included in the ordinance. And it is left to the discretion of the community development director and the city attorney for the content of the affordable housing agreement, and to the community development director for what is required for a density bonus project. This will allow us to update without going through this process to ensure that we have what we need to ensure that a project complies with density bonus. And finally is the distribution and development criteria for the affordable units. As I mentioned, this is really part of the inclusionary housing, but since many of the density bonus affordable units are inclusionary units as well, our ordinance requires that the inclusionary units are distributed like evenly throughout the project and have similar amenities. So this language has been updated both to allow the possibility to consolidate affordable units in cases where a project developer works with an affordable housing developer, which is often the case, and then there is the affordable housing project and the market rate project. It also, the language has removed all subjective criteria and replaced it with objective criteria for the distribution of these affordable units. So that is a summary of the ordinance amendments, and staff does recommend that the commission approve resolution 2401, recommending that the city council adopt amendments to the planning and zoning code related to density bonus. And upon recommendation by the Planning and Zoning Commission, the item will go to City Council, which is expected to be in July of this year. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you. This is not an easy task, I'm sure, because it's very tricky with the language and difficult to make everything reconcile correctly. So our format is usually questions for staff, then we will move to public comment, and then we will discuss the issue amongst commissioners. So next is commissioner questions for staff about any specific items or clarifications. Okay, Commissioner White.
Good quick one. I usually remember that. This last item, I got a little excited. Sorry about that. Just super quick question, just on the definitions, sort of the AMI-based definitions in it. And it was just the difference between, you've got low income and then lower income, low being between 50 and 80% AMI, and lower being up to 80% AMI. And I'm just curious, those seem to be effectively the same thing. I mean, I suppose lower can dip below 50% AMI, but I'm curious why there are those two and whether they serve different purposes or different types of projects.
They do, and I think it's maybe part laziness to sometimes not always have to say very low and maybe extremely low. So what it is the lower income encompasses everything low onto extremely low income. So it allows the flexibility to go lower. You know, you don't have to be locked into the low income. You can actually go lower and qualify for incentives or
Got it. So
What-
when it
what-
makes sense for a project to just know that it's somewhere between basically 0 and 80, and they're willing to,
Exactly.
and they want some flexibility.
Exactly.
As opposed to a project that's slotting in between 50 and 80.
Exactly.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Makes sense. Thank you. That's helpful.
Other questions for staff? Commissioner Momin?
Yeah, I have a bunch of questions regarding inclusionary housing. You did not cover that in your presentation, but I was going through the track changes, and I was looking at inclusionary housing requirements and the density bonus housing, affordable housing requirements, and there are overlaps. As you mentioned that density bonus affordable housing would be counted towards satisfaction of requirement of inclusionary housing, right? That would happen if the density bonus project provides low-income housing. But there are some categories where some of the density bonus project would only provide moderate income for sale housing. So in that situation, because the city requires 15% for inclusionary housing to be low income, would that project need to provide both 15% inclusionary housing to the city and whatever percent of for sale moderate income housing as part of their density bonus project?
Correct. So you need to fulfill the qualifications, the specifications of both density bonus law as well as our inclusionary housing ordinance. So many developers try to line those up, but sometimes they won't. So as you mentioned, you could qualify for a for sale of moderate income housing. That would not qualify for our inclusionary housing
Right.
ordinance. So they'd also have to do our inclusionary housing. On the flip side, depending on the number of units you have, our inclusionary housing allows an in-lieu fee to be paid. However, when you're doing density bonus, you have to provide those units. There is no in-lieu fee. So if you are combining them and you're like, I want to do an in-lieu fee for those units, no, because you're committed to providing those for density bonus. So when they do line up, they can be, some people call it double counting or double dipping, but they do meet if an affordable unit meets the requirements of both our inclusionary housing ordinance as well as the state density bonus, that is the only time.
Got it. Okay. So basically, they will have to pay in lieu fee if they are going for just 30% or 45% moderate income housing to get the density bonus from the state law.
If they're doing moderate income housing, they would also need to do inclusionary units that satisfy our,
Or pay in lieu fee.
or pay the in lieu fee if they qualify for that, depending on the number of.
Okay. So, so that I think would take care of that, because in the same section, I think we are also talking about dividing inclusionary housing into low income and very low income. And so if they don't provide that, then we would have to take care of that through in lieu fee.
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay, and then the next question is about the, whatever we call it, the density bonus law requires the affordable housing to be affordable for 55 years. And inclusionary housing requires that to be affordable in perpetuity. And so if there is this overlap, like let's say a density bonus project provides 15% affordable housing units, and that fulfills the requirement of city's inclusionary housing requirement also. Now the density bonus law, requires them to be affordable only for 55 years, but the city requires them to be affordable for in perpetuity. So how would that be balanced?
So similarly, if these density bonus units are also being used as inclusionary units, if they're counting, they are required to be in perpetuity. If you had the scenario where only some of the density bonus units, for whatever reason, qualify for inclusionary and some don't, those density bonus units that don't qualify as for our inclusionary housing could be limited to 55 years.
Okay.
So it's just those that qualify as an inclusionary housing unit are those that we have the ability and actually the requirement to restrict in perpetuity.
Okay. So certain project provides 24% or whatever higher than 15%, then anything above 15% could be affordable for 55 years only, and then 15% would be
Correct.
affordable in perpetuity.
Unless the developer agreed to.
Right. So there has to be some kind of mechanism of agreeing to that.
Exactly. Mhm.
Okay. Yeah. So I don't know whether that needs to be like indicated, like documented in the code somehow, or do you think whatever language we have through the track changes is enough for interpretation?
I think it is in the ordinance. However, this is an attempt to streamline it and make it easier to understand. And as we implement it over the next few years, we will, as you know, find more things that we can clarify better and as well as
Okay.
update. So.
Other questions?
Yeah, and then sorry.
Commissioner Moman, yeah, go ahead and continue.
Yeah, in your staff report, you also talked about density bonus for commercial developers. I don't know how many properties in Albany would go for density bonus on a commercial property.
I'm sorry, density bonus on what I can.
There is this,
You?
Assembly Bill 1551 that allows 20% density bonus for commercial developers. It is on. It's on page
So,
2 of staff
yes,
report.
I don't, s- so is your question, do you see that happening in Albany, or what is your?
I'm wondering, like on San Pablo Avenue, would there be any developer who would be, interested in 20% density bonus for commercial development?
Yeah, it will be interesting. In our ordinance, since all our commercial districts allow
Housing.
I'm not sure that this will be implemented unless
Okay.
someone really wants to do some huge
Okay,
commercial.
so
I don't see this as
you think
super
this
relevant.
would be relevant only where the commercial development, like only commercial development is allowed on a property and not mixed use?
Yeah. I mean, who knows? Maybe a Costco is going to move in and they want the extra square footage, and then they will be excited to do this. So I don't see it. We really have a small, just lot pattern that I don't think really lends itself to this, but, never say never. Maybe someone will come up with something creative.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because in any case, like San Pablo Avenue, lots and even Solano commercial lots, they have a maximum cap on their commercial development.
Exactly.
They can't exceed like 0.95 or 1.25 for just commercial FAR. So I don't know how this 20% bonus would be applicable to them.
Yeah, I think we all know that the commercial real estate is not really the selling point right now. So,
Maybe at this, it may not be that relevant.
never say never.
Yeah. Okay.
Commissioner Liebenow?
Yeah, can you remind me what the resolutions are? Are these the resolutions that we're looking to adopt? I think.
So the resolution is the decision, essentially kind of encapsulates the decision by, in this case, the Planning Commission.
Yeah.
So I do not have,
It says here, staff recommends that the PZC approve resolution recommending that the city council adopt amendments to the planning and zoning code. Can you refer back to what those amendments look like, just so that?
so the amendments were in the attachment to the.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they included amendments related to updates to state near ordinance in conformance with state law. And so it was removing specified quoted language of tables of concessions and referring to state density bonus law. The the removal of the council, and I'm not sure I'm answering your question.
No, you're answering it.
As well as the efficiency amendments. So I sort of grouped them in all three. I think it was attachment 3 of the staff report that had the track changes version.
I see.
Shows it all in track changes, which was pretty darn messy. So I actually attached the clean version to the ordinance for the ease of our ordinance updater. Much easier to replace an ordinance. So that is what the resolution is kind of saying that you would be
Okay.
recommending approval for.
So the question is, what is the, how do you say, thought process behind removing city councils? You had just said it, I'm sorry, I can't remember the exact language.
Requiring that city council be the final decision maker for
Yeah,
density
like
bonus project.
removing their final,
So a few things. As Commissioner Wadi mentioned, historically jurisdictions put as many barriers in the way of housing development. So this is just a slight little one. It's requiring an immediate additional public hearing for a density bonus project. So the state pretty much says they must be treated as any other housing development, and we're saying, but you need to be approved by city council. So it is, on one hand, just one extra barrier for the developer to provide that, to get entitlement, to get approved for that housing. Secondly, most of these projects are eligible, are SB 3, there's SB 330, the Housing Act Accountability, and one of the requirements of SB 330 is that these housing projects cannot be subject to more than 5 public hearings. So if there were, this just adds one more required hearing that eats into the required 5. We don't like to have 5 hearings for these projects. We hope they can maybe be approved in, one study session or without a study session.
Yeah.
And I think also, as Commissioner Wadi mentioned, density bonus wasn't used for very many years. So when people started using it again, I think there was kind of like this, what is this? This is crazy, Godzilla's coming. I'm not actually exaggerating much. It was very contentious. And so I think the paradigm I don't want to say in California or all of the Bay Area, but I think a lot more folks are aware that all of our past practices have put us in this problem, and we want to streamline the process for housing development, not put more obstacles in the way. Therefore, the requirement, I shouldn't say the requirement, but it was adopted as part of our housing element. One of the program was to remove that additional obstacle to have density bonus projects be first reviewed by Planning and Zoning Commission and then by City Council.
gotcha. Yeah, I guess the question is more for, I wonder if there are alternatives or maybe some compromises in between, only because I think about, let's see. I mean, I know that there's the housing task force that's currently being put together, and, I do think it's worth having some kind of pause measure around, like, big development projects like this. I mean, for example, the Golden Gate Fields, there is a pause measure there in order to make sure that what's being developed is in line with what the community wants and votes for, that voter referendum thing. And so I don't know how comfortable I feel about the city council being removed of that, like, practice or,
So
yeah.
I appreciate that, but just a few comments on that. One is that this is a housing program that was included in our housing element that went through several public hearings. And again, the goal of the housing element is to break down barriers and to provide more housing, opportunities for housing, and to be more inclusive with that housing. And that housing element, including the program to remove City Council, was approved by City Council.
It was proposed by city council.
No, it was, I don't know who came up with that one program, but it went through several public hearings. It went to the Planning Commission, I think, 3 or 4 times before it went to City Council for at least twice before it was approved. So there was a large community engagement to the housing element process. I would say at least 9 meetings over the period, public hearing meetings on engagement on housing elements. So there was a lot of input on the programs that were adopted.
Yeah.
And this is referring to how an actual project is processed, how it is, goes through the entitlement process, as we say, and how it ultimately can receive approval for, assuming approval, as opposed to a plan, which again is a different process altogether, such as the housing element, was a long engagement to ensure public participation and transparency, which we hope to be able to do with Golden Gate Fields, but it's not the decision on one building that is the result of the zoning that has already gone through the process and/or the specific plan that has gone through the process,
Yeah.
and/or the programs and policies of the housing element that has also gone through those processes.
Are there other cities that are adopting the same measure? I guess, like, is there like, you said it so well earlier, I can't remember, but if there's like some kind of like standard or a practice who encourages this type of?
Are you speaking?
I'm still speaking to the same
The
part.
city council?
Yeah, just the city council.
I don't think, well, there might be other cities that had that. I have never worked at a city that has put this requirement on density bonus projects. So I can't say definitively, but it is specifically tailored to our city and the barriers that we've kind of identified when we were going through the housing element process. So I will tell you that every jurisdiction who has done the 6th cycle of the housing element, they are very robust documents, or at least for those jurisdictions who commit to it and feel strongly about kind of the purpose of the housing element. There's still going to be jurisdictions out there who are kind of fighting tooth and nail against it, but there are many jurisdictions such as ours who have robust housing program implementation ahead of them. So
Yeah, I mean, thank you. Thank you for the clarification. I only asked just because that was something that piqued my interest while you were speaking.
great,
Yeah.
thank you.
I finished?
I'm done.
Okay. I guess I just had one quick question, and that was about the in lieu fees. I thought we discussed getting rid of that. I don't think we maybe took any specific
remember.
action on it, and maybe you weren't around when we were doing that, because the housing element, it was a 2-year process. It was very involved and took a lot of our time and effort. But we did discuss that because we have no mechanism for using those fees. So I don't know if we,
So,
where we ended up with.
yeah, I don't recall. I've kind of gone through the housing element programs kind of extensively. I do personally think there are things in our inclusionary housing ordinance that are worth revisiting. The purpose of this ordinance, these amendments, was literally the density bonus ordinance and to bring it honestly up to date with state law. And then it also happened to check off one of our housing element program goals. So I mean, I have 56 more program goals to get done. But I mean, aside from that, I would love to delve into the inclusionary housing ordinance. I thought this was rather straightforward, since, as I mentioned, the only substantive change policy-wise was the removal of the city council approval. So, and I thought I didn't want to hold this up for what would hopefully be a more robust discussion and public input on changes to our inclusionary housing ordinance.
Maybe just to like refresh my memory on that, I think it was less about in concept the fee, but just where's the bucket of revenue sitting that the fees go into, and how is that used? I mean, the good news is I don't think people are probably knocking down your door paying the in lieu fee for anything right now, so you probably have a few months to dig into that before it matters. But I think that was the genesis
I
of
see.
the
Okay.
question.
Good to know.
We
Thank
don't
you.
have any way to use it. We don't have a redevelopment fund or a redevelopment agency, so. Anyway, that was just, maybe that's an aside, and we can deal with that later.
Yeah.
But I think, as written in the code here, it kind of recommends in lieu fee when the maximum units, the development size is like 5 to 6 units total. And if it is between 7 and 13, then the code says at least one inclusionary housing unit is required. So, and like if the unit number is less than 1, then it would be in lieu fee. So, but then, is there any other reference which kind of gives option to the developers? Either you provide inclusionary housing unit, or
For
in lieu fee.
providing the fee.
Yeah.
We're about to open it to public comment if you want to make any more comments. Okay, thank you for attending.
Excuse me?
Can you bring up the rest of the CEQA statement, or is that because of the way the slide is made?
They can't see, they want to see the bottom part.
Right, I don't have, if the, Josh, can you scroll down to the CEQA statement? I can read it out loud to you because it's in the staff report.
That citation is online if you want to access it. It's online under the staff report.
Because the issue with, again, 1600 Solano was a report that there'd be no impact on traffic. And in fact, no traffic study was done for 1600 Solano. So how can they make that statement? And secondly, about 5 years ago, they made a study of Dr. Paul Kasrovi's practice, dental practice on Ensenada. And they found that 46 cars parked between 12 and 5 to drop off children to his practice. He was going to then advance from 7 chairs to 11 at 1600 Solano Alvarez. If you extrapolate up from that and said, where are all these cars going to park? And even furthermore, there's no place for the children to be dropped off. So during the June 1st, 2022 meeting, one Albany resident said, what are they going to do? They're going to open the door and say, run, Johnny, run. There's no place to drop off those children at a very dangerous intersection. Again,
We're addressing item 7-2.
thank you. Again, this is a little off the topic. Thanks
Yes,
for hearing us.
thank you. Okay, thank you. Okay, well, any public comment? We'll open it to public comment.
All right.
Say,
Anyone else?
anyone else online? There's no one else in the room here.
Right. So if
anyone else-
anyone else attending virtually wishes to speak, please use the raise the hand icon. Nope.
As there's no more public comment, we will close that and move to commissioner discussion and a vote on the item. Anyone like to make any further comments?
I'll just say, looks good to me, supportive of it. I said my policy-based comments under the earlier item, and I think both I appreciate the cross-referencing just to the government code section, because I am confident state density bonus law will be amended again this cycle, and it prevents us from having to do this exercise every year. So I think that's a great strategy, and I always think it's helpful to have the municipal code aligned with state law, because somebody who has to implement that without having that happen, it is really hard. So I think it's good transparency both for the public, but also ease of use for staff to have it in our municipal code. So I applaud you guys for doing that.
Okay, thank you. Other comments? Commissioner Liebenow, more comments?
I think it's important for our city of Albany to comply with state law. I also don't agree with the piece of removing city council's pause measure. I don't know what else to call it right now, but I personally don't agree with that piece. I don't, what's the word? Is it reject or not support?
Any of the above?
I'm sorry?
Any of the above.
Okay, well then in that case, the words. I personally reject it just because I do think that in some ways there is the state and then there's also what would make sense for the community. And I would like to say that I think City of Albany does a really good job of really engaging with community to better understand what their needs are. So that's where I'm at with that.
Okay, anything else? Commissioner Moman, comments?
Yeah, thank you for all the work that you have done. It's very complicated. I support all the amendments, including the elimination of requirement of city council approval for concessions, density bonus, as well as the affordable housing development agreement. I think, and also like the changes in the distribution criteria. They are really thoughtful and also flexible if in case there is an affordable housing developer in the picture and the project needs to be kind of physically divided. So that has been done very well. Referring to relevant sections in the state code is a good idea. You might need some educating, people to like go to the right section. You may have to help some people who are not very familiar with the code in terms of interpreting the right sections. But I think it simplifies the municipal code. So I think which is an improvement. The methodology of density bonus calculation that you showed, I think, is very useful. I think you should do that for Solano commercial also. I'm not sure like how it would be documented, in what form, if it is not included in the zoning code. But maybe there should be some fact sheet or something that could be available for applicants, developers to see the kind of method they have to follow. And so there is kind of uniformity in the calculation of density bonus. So like different interpretations should not be like used for different projects. That would have big impact on the actual output of the housing, whether negative or positive. And then I also thought there is some reference in program 2.I, I think, about public education campaign, about density bonus law, and also the SB 330 and its impact on the projects, so that people don't get kind of shocked after getting seeing them approved with huge concessions and all that. I think along with that is, I think, very important step we should take. But also, I think there should be some way to educate, small property owners also to use density bonus on their properties instead of just inclusionary housing, because that might be more, I think, efficient than just inclusionary housing. Like if we want more affordable housing to be distributed across the city and not just along San Pablo Avenue or Solano Avenue, if we want those scattered site policy to be more effective, I think we would need to engage the small property owners more, I think, actively. And so maybe there should be some, strategy for that, reaching out to them and just explaining them that, even if like in R2 zone or R3 zone, smaller lots, they can still use the density bonus with just 1 or 2 number of affordable housing units added to their property, but they can increase the overall numbers, and that could give us a nice gentle density increase across the city, rather than just like mid-rises along the commercial corridors. So yeah, that's all I have to say.
Okay, I'll try to wrap it up. Yeah, I support all the changes as you proposed, and I recognize the hard work there. And I also support eliminating the final city council approval. And my reasoning is somewhat what you've mentioned. It's the same thing. We were limited to 5 hearings. So if the city council is the 5th hearing, it's essentially meaningless, because we are required to approve these projects by state law. So it really is a meaningless hearing, in a sense. I mean, it might give people one more chance to express their opinions about it, but as a practical matter for approval, it is meaningless. And if council did reject it and sent it back to planning and zoning, that would be another 1 + 2 hearings, and dragging that process out even further. So it really becomes a meaningless hearing, I think. And I think we are competent as this body to approve the projects. We are required by state law to approve them once they've reached a certain level of resolution. So it is in the view of reducing obstacles and impediments to creating housing that I would support that. And the other thing to consider is that the housing element, and removing this city council meeting was in the housing element, which was approved by city council. So the council itself has approved eliminating their hearing. So to that, that's what I would say to that measure. Otherwise, I think I'm ready to support this.
And I just shouldn't add anything, but any project that is approved or denied by this commission is always appealable to city council. So.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I just want to say, I think what I worry is just that in some ways, developers have more rights in this situation. And so you know, if it's something that was already adopted by city council, and then there is an opportunity to appeal, you know, do we need all of us to vote on this? Or can I abstain on a vote?
You can vote yes, no, or abstain.
Okay.
It's up to you.
All right. Thank you, thank you. I appreciate you all just being a mentor in this process for me. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, do we have a motion?
Sure, I'm happy to make a motion and approve, I believe this is item 7-2, and recommending approval of resolution 2024-01 as proposed.
And I will second.
Okay, we'll go to vote. Commissioner Momin,
Yes.
Commissioner Wadi,
Aye.
Commissioner Liebenow,
I can vote no.
no?
Yeah.
And I will vote yes. So that motion carries 3-1. Yeah, item 7-2, resolution 2024-01 has been approved. Okay, so moving on to our next item, it would be new business. Staff, do you have any new business or any?
No, I mean, not more new business than my announcements. We are working away, which kind of gets into, we have the next, we are experiencing kind of a lull in applications, especially for kind of commission level items. So we have one track map, condo map for 925 Adams Street, which is the 3-unit development that you all approved. So that is still being reviewed by our city surveyor, and that's really the only commission item in the near future. So I'm hoping that I can consolidate that one kind of minor item with some fun study session.
Well, there's no lack of policy things to work on.
Exactly.
So, yeah. Okay, and with that, our next meeting is Wednesday, June 26th, and that will conclude our meeting. Our meeting is now adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Good night.
Thank you. By the way, welcome to the team.